When you talk about the Canadian general who struck fear into German forces during World War II, what stands out most is his sheer tactical brilliance. This was a commander who didn't just follow the textbook. He seemed to rewrite it as the battle unfolded. German officers had reason to dread facing him because he had a rare ability to anticipate moves, respond with lightning speed, and exploit weaknesses in ways that seemed almost prescient. Every maneuver, every flanking action, and every artillery placement was meticulously calculated. But it always had an element of unpredictability. That unpredictability is what made him such a nightmare to the Wehrmacht. They never quite knew what he would do next. And that uncertainty alone was enough to slow their attacks, cause hesitation, and ultimately, increase casualties on their side. On the Allied front, this general's talent didn't go unnoticed. British and American commanders admired him not only for his battlefield victories but for the way he integrated multiple elements of the army seamlessly. Infantry, tanks, artillery, and engineers all moved as a coordinated force under his command. He understood that battles weren't won by a single unit acting in isolation. They were won when every part of the army worked in concert, anticipating the other's needs and reinforcing each other at just the right moment. This coordination was particularly evident in operations where terrain was a challenge. Whether it was crossing flooded polders, assaulting fortified positions, or maneuvering through heavily wooded areas, his forces didn't just attack. They adapted to the battlefield, turning obstacles into opportunities. What made him even more impressive was how he prepared for the enemy before the first shot was fired. He studied German tactics, understood their strengths and weaknesses, and often predicted their responses before they themselves realized what was happening. This wasn't just luck. It was preparation, observation, and experience combined. By analyzing intelligence reports, terrain, and even enemy psychology, he could position his forces in a way that maximized his strengths and minimized exposure to German firepower. German commanders came to realize that wherever this Canadian general was planning an operation, the odds were stacked against them. Not just because of superior numbers or equipment, but because he thought several moves ahead, like a chess player plotting checkmate. His ability to innovate on the battlefield set him apart from other commanders of the time. He was willing to take calculated risks when the situation demanded it, and these risks often paid off in spectacular fashion. For example, he frequently used combined arms tactics in ways that the Germans hadn't fully anticipated, integrating armor and infantry in rapid advances that would break through defensive lines. He also understood the value of deception, creating feints and diversions that pulled German forces out of position. These strategies required not only courage but incredible foresight, and they forced the Germans to expend resources trying to counter threats that weren't even the main point of attack. But perhaps the most critical aspect of his tactical genius was how he balanced aggression with prudence. He knew when to push hard and when to consolidate, when to exploit a breakthrough and when to pause to regroup. This balance was crucial in maintaining the momentum of campaigns without overextending his forces. German commanders, in contrast, often relied on rigid defensive doctrines that couldn't adapt to the fluidity of his attacks. Facing him meant that every decision could lead to a trap, a flanking maneuver, or a surprise assault. And this created a level of anxiety in the German ranks that went beyond ordinary battlefield stress. The fear he inspired wasn't just personal, it was systemic. His very presence on the battlefield forced German officers to second-guess their plans constantly, making them reactive rather than proactive. What made his reputation even more remarkable was that it wasn't built solely on a single victory or operation. Each campaign he led reinforced the perception of his tactical genius. The Allies saw results that were tangible and transformative. Fewer casualties for his troops, faster advances, and decisive outcomes that shifted the broader strategic situation. It was this consistency, coupled with his creative and adaptive approach, that earned him deep respect among U.K. and U.S. commanders. They recognized that this was a leader who didn't just win battles. He shaped campaigns. His methods were studied, emulated, and admired because they worked under the most challenging conditions, against a competent and determined enemy. Ultimately, the fear the Germans felt toward this Canadian general and the admiration he earned from the Allies stemmed from the same root. He understood war in a way that few others did. It wasn't just about firepower, positions, or numbers. It was about thinking several moves ahead, anticipating human behavior and orchestrating his forces with precision and creativity. That combination of vision, preparation, and tactical brilliance made him one of the most formidable commanders of World War II. The kind whose name alone could unsettle enemy forces and inspire his own troops to achieve feats that would become legendary in military history. What truly set this Canadian general apart was not just his tactical genius but the way he led his men from the front. He wasn't the kind of commander who stayed safely behind the lines, issuing orders from a distant office. Instead, he was present where it mattered most, moving among his troops, observing the battlefield firsthand, and making split-second decisions that could change the course of a fight. This hands-on leadership style had a profound effect on both his soldiers and his enemies. For his troops, seeing their general in the thick of the action was incredibly motivating. It inspired confidence, instilled discipline, and made soldiers willing to take bold risks that they might otherwise have avoided. They knew he understood what they were facing, and that knowledge created a bond of trust that few commanders ever achieved. Being on the front lines also gave him a unique perspective on the battle. He could see how the enemy was reacting, adjust his tactics in real time, and exploit openings that might have been invisible from headquarters. This situational awareness allowed him to maintain initiative even in the most chaotic and dangerous conditions. While other generals might have relied on reports, maps, and communications that could be delayed or inaccurate, he relied on direct observation and personal judgment. That approach made his forces more agile and responsive, giving them an edge in situations where speed and adaptability were critical. German commanders quickly realized that facing him meant they couldn't predict the pace or direction of his attacks. They were constantly on edge, never sure when or where he would strike next. His fearless presence under fire went beyond mere bravado. It was calculated courage. He understood the importance of morale, and he knew that his example could embolden his troops at critical moments. Soldiers fighting alongside a visible, confident leader were more willing to press attacks, hold positions under pressure, and recover quickly from setbacks. This psychological edge was a force multiplier. It made his units more resilient and effective, which in turn frustrated German commanders who were used to encountering stiff but conventional resistance. The uncertainty of facing an enemy who seemed to thrive under fire was unnerving, and it disrupted German planning and coordination. Another critical aspect of his leadership was his ability to maintain calm and clarity under extreme stress. Even in situations where his forces were outnumbered or facing heavy opposition, he never appeared panicked or indecisive. That steadiness radiated outward, calming his officers and soldiers and allowing them to focus on executing complex maneuvers without hesitation. German observers recognized this too, facing a leader who remained composed while orchestrating attacks that often involved multiple moving parts created a sense of inevitability, as if defeat was not just likely but almost certain if they didn't respond perfectly, which they rarely could. He also had a remarkable talent for communicating with his officers and troops in ways that were direct, practical, and motivational. Orders were clear, concise, and easy to execute, which reduced confusion and errors in the heat of battle. At the same time, he encouraged initiative among subordinates, trusting them to make decisions that aligned with his overall objectives. This balance between centralized strategy and decentralized execution allowed his forces to operate with flexibility, exploiting opportunities as they arose without waiting for constant directives from above. German forces, in contrast, often struggled with rigid hierarchies that slowed their reaction times and limited their ability to adapt to unexpected developments. Perhaps most importantly, his fearless leadership created a culture of accountability and professionalism. Soldiers knew that he would be present to witness both their successes and failures, which encouraged careful planning, disciplined execution, and mutual support among units. Mistakes were corrected quickly, but his presence also reassured troops that their efforts mattered and that their sacrifices were recognized. This culture amplified the effectiveness of his tactical decisions because they were executed by motivated, confident soldiers who understood the stakes and believed in their leadership. All of these factors combined to make him not only a brilliant tactician but a psychological weapon in his own right. German forces feared him because his presence made them unpredictable and vulnerable, while his soldiers fought with an intensity and cohesion that they could not replicate elsewhere. His leadership under fire was as decisive a factor in his success as any map, plan, or strategic maneuver. It wasn't just about commanding troops. It was about inspiring them, understanding them, and using that understanding to outthink and outfight the enemy. That ability to lead fearlessly from the front cemented his reputation and ensured that both allies and adversaries recognized him as one of the most formidable generals of the Second World War. What really distinguished this Canadian general from so many others wasn't just his tactical brilliance or his fearless leadership. It was his ability to think strategically on a much broader scale. He wasn't focused solely on winning individual battles. He understood that each engagement was part of a larger campaign, and that success required careful coordination across multiple armies, nations, and supply networks. His vision extended beyond the immediate battlefield to the entire operational theater. And that perspective is what earned him the admiration of U.K. and U.S. commanders. They recognized that he wasn't just reacting to circumstances. He was shaping them. He planned not only for victories but for sustainable campaigns that could be maintained over weeks and months, which is exactly what made him such a formidable presence in the eyes of the Germans. From the very beginning of each campaign, he approached planning with meticulous attention to detail. He considered the terrain, the weather, the strength of enemy forces, and the logistical challenges of moving men, vehicles, and artillery over long distances. But he didn't stop at the technical aspects of warfare. He also accounted for the human element. He understood that soldiers under stress would respond differently depending on morale, fatigue, and leadership. His strategies incorporated ways to keep troops motivated, focused, and cohesive, ensuring that each unit could perform at peak efficiency even under intense pressure. This integration of strategy, logistics, and human psychology was rare, and it made him a general whose influence extended far beyond his own army. One of the most striking elements of his strategic vision was his ability to coordinate multinational forces. During World War II, no campaign was fought by a single nation acting alone. The Allies had armies from Britain, the United States, Canada, and other nations, each with different doctrines, equipment, and operational styles. Many generals struggled to make these forces operate as a single, coherent unit, but he excelled at it. He could synchronize movements, ensure communication lines were robust, and align the objectives of different nations into a cohesive plan. This ability not only maximized the effectiveness of his own troops but also strengthened the overall Allied effort. British and American commanders recognized this talent and often relied on his insights and guidance when planning joint operations. His strategic thinking also extended to timing and momentum. He knew that the success of a campaign depended not only on winning battles but on choosing the right moments to strike. He often waited until conditions were favorable, not for hesitation's sake, but to ensure that when his forces advanced, they did so with maximum effect. This patience, combined with rapid exploitation once an opportunity arose, meant that he could deliver decisive blows that German forces found difficult to counter. For the enemy, this created a persistent sense of unpredictability and danger. They never knew exactly when or where he would act, and that uncertainty forced them into defensive positions and reactive strategies, which only played into his hands. Another dimension of his strategic vision was his understanding of logistics. He knew that armies could only fight as long as they were supplied. He paid close attention to supply lines, transportation networks, and the distribution of ammunition, food, and fuel. He planned offensives in a way that ensured troops could be resupplied quickly, even in challenging conditions, while also seeking to disrupt the enemy's logistics wherever possible. German commanders recognized that facing him wasn't just about surviving the immediate battle. It was about enduring a prolonged campaign against a leader who had thought through every practical detail to sustain his forces while weakening theirs. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of his strategy was the balance he struck between vision and flexibility. He had an overarching plan for each campaign, yet he was never rigid. If circumstances changed, he adapted. If an opportunity arose unexpectedly, he seized it. This combination of long-term planning and tactical agility allowed his forces to exploit fleeting advantages and respond effectively to the enemy's moves. British and American commanders admired this skill because it demonstrated not only intelligence, but also judgment, decisiveness, and a deep understanding of the nature of war itself. Ultimately, his strategic vision made him a general who influenced the course of entire campaigns, not just individual battles. The Germans feared him because his presence and decisions reshaped their battlefield calculations and forced them to fight on his terms. The Allies respected him because he maximized their strengths, minimized risks, and coordinated complex operations that required cooperation across national armies and military branches. He was a general who saw war in 3 dimensions: the battlefield, the army, and the theater of operations as a whole. That holistic approach, combining foresight, logistics, and tactical insight, is why he remains one of the most respected figures in Allied military history and why his reputation still resonates decades later as an example of strategic genius in action.